we'd like to take a moment to pay tribute to two individuals, Robert Levine MD and Jeffrey Cohen PhD, both of whom passed away this year and who were pillars of the research oversight community. First, David Borowski, Vice President of IRB Compliance at WCG and past member of PRIM&R's Board of Directors, will speak about Dr. Levine. Then Elizabeth Buchanan, Director of the Office of Research Support Services and Staff Senior Research Scientist at the Marshfield Clinic Research Institute and also a PRIM&R board member, will speak about Dr. Cohen. David?
Thanks, Brenda. My first experience with Bob Levine was in the late 1990s at one of the annual PRIM&R meetings in San Diego. He was part of the faculty for a day-long IRB 101 course, and he had a commanding presence. At the time, I found him quite intimidating because, well, once you heard his introduction as part of the faculty for that session, he was Bob Levine, the Bob Levine who helped create the Belmont Report and who had written several books about clinical research and was involved in the Declaration of Helsinki and editor of the IRB Journal. And I was just an IRB guy. It was a great session that day, and after hearing Bob's introduction, it was really a pleasure to think that someone like Bob was coming in to teach people like me how to do the work we were doing. A few years later, I found myself on the PRIM&R Board of Directors and seated next to Bob for dinner, who I really didn't know all that well up until that point, only through his interaction as faculty at PRIM&R workshops. This was also an intimidating event until we all started talking, and it became evident that he was actually a pretty nice, relatable, normal guy. And over the next several years, I had the pleasure of serving on the board with Bob, working together as faculty at AER meetings, and even traveling with him to Malawi for a regional IRB training workshop where we shared the misfortune of lost luggage. And there is nothing like that experience to reveal one's true character. There was a lot to admire about Bob. First was his work ethic and dedication to PRIM&R. If James Brown was the hardest working man in show business, then Bob Levine was surely the hardest working man in PRIM&R. Bob was heavily invested in the success of the organization, especially in its early years when it needed that kind of encouragement. He was part of a very small team who did everything. They rolled up their sleeves and created the entire program, found speakers, even put together the binders of materials for participants, because this was in the days before we had conference apps that helped us find all of our materials. And this type of in the trenches work was just not something that I think was typically expected of somebody with Bob's resume. But he happily did it. Bob continued serving on the PRIM&R board and also as conference faculty for as long as he could, even as he encountered health setbacks that first required the use of a cane and then eventually required him to use a scooter to get around at the larger AER venues. And if you were a frequent AER attendee, you'd have been wise to look out if Bob's electric scooter was headed your way. Bob was also dedicated to the work of IRBs in general, again, doing tasks that went beyond what his CV would suggest were in the normal scope of work for him. He chaired the IRB at Yale for decades. He edited the journal IRB Ethics and Human Research, which was the first of its kind and preceded the rise of the IRB Professional and the CIP certification, though he strongly endorsed both of those things, and his presence on the PRIM&R board, I think, helped ensure that those things came to fruition. At his heart, he was also a teacher. On that trip to Malawi, I can still see in my mind's eye the meeting participants gathered around him in a group several people deep. Each wanted to have that moment to talk with Bob personally, and many expressed their own appreciation for his work in advancing international research ethics, which included work on the Declaration of Helsinki and the CIOMS guidelines. And this was a scene that I would see play out at any event where Bob was speaking, regardless of the location. People gravitated towards him and wanted to have that chance to tell him what impact he had on their work and their lives. However, my personal favorite memories of Bob are when we would gather with other PRIM&R board members at a restaurant the night before a board meeting, and Bob would hold court, whiskey in hand, regaling those gathered around with stories about his travel adventures and also the books he was currently reading, anecdotes from his professional life, commentary in the world in general. It was captivating and a lot of fun. And it turned out that the Bob Levine that had so intimidated me 20 years earlier was the kind of guy you'd gladly spend any time with. And I wish each of you could have had that opportunity to do so. I'd invite you to read the PRIM&R blog post that was posted in tribute to Bob earlier this year. And in that blog post, there's a link to the 2014 People and Perspectives interview with him, which will give you a more well-rounded picture of Bob and it's time well spent in doing so. I miss Bob greatly. I know everybody that had the chance to interact with him did, and we'll continue to miss Bob over the next several years. And with that, I'll turn it over to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you for those kind words for Dr. Levine. It's my honor and privilege to be here today as a member of the PRIM&R Board of Directors to recognize Dr. Jeff Cohen, who has been a friend, colleague, mentor, leader, expert, and all-around good man to and for this community for decades. First, to his family, his wife Cindy, your children, and your grandchildren, let me say on behalf of the PRIM&R family and community, thank you for sharing Jeff with us so generously over the years. He made such an impact in so many different ways, and we are so very sorry for your loss. To his HRP family, we offer our sympathies and we share in your grief. Jeff held many roles and distinctions during his career. Starting in the 70s, Jeff served as Associate Director for Research Compliance and Information Management in the Office for Research at the State University of New York at Albany, a position he held for 20 years. He then moved on to OHRP as its Director of the Division of Education and Development, a role which enabled him to truly make a difference in the research community, our community, and how we learned about regulations. And moreover, Jeff helped us understand the hows and the whys behind the regulations. As our colleague Eric Allen said of Jeff, he shared his knowledge through stories, and many of us have heard Jeff say over the years, "Let me tell you a story." Jeff's longtime colleague, Cheryl Savini, reminded us that Jeff's greatest strength was his ability to train and educate in such a unique way that his passion for every aspect of our field would be passed along to those that were in his audiences. Jeff's contributions to PRIM&R are many. In 1990, he served as ARENA president. He sat on the PRIM&R Education Committee and the Council for Certification of IRB Professionals. Jeff spoke at many PRIM&R conferences and facilitated many of our At Your Doorstep training events. In 2009, Jeff received the ARENA Legacy Award. This award honors individuals who both embody and consistently foster professional leadership, education, and mentoring. And as we heard yesterday, PRIM&R's Executive Director, Elisa Hurley, announced that in 2022, PRIM&R will be launching a new award, the PRIM&R Service Award, to recognize individuals who have provided significant, timely, or timeless service to the PRIM&R community in areas including teaching, mentorship, innovation, leadership, engagement, program improvement, and research. Jeff truly exemplified this idea of service. Indeed, it would be hard to overstate the impact his service has had on this community. And to recognize and memorialize his countless contributions, PRIM&R is honored to name the inaugural PRIM&R Service Award the Jeff Cohen PRIM&R Service Award. Jeff had a big heart, a big smile, and a big, great laugh. Jeff was wicked smart, matched only by genuine kindness. Our community will remember Jeff with genuine appreciation. We will miss him dearly, but he can rest assured that he left us, this PRIM&R community and beyond, with gifts we will cherish everlong.